It all started on a Tuesday morning in a hospital waiting room that smelled faintly of hand sanitizer and burnt coffee. People were sitting quietly, scrolling through their phones or staring blankly at the linoleum floors, lost in their own storms. And then, just like that, the silence shattered. A man stood up, pointed at a nurse, and told her to just do your job. The words rang out like a slap in the face, sharp and humiliating. Most people lowered their eyes, uncomfortable with the tension. But what no one knew, not yet at least, was that this nurse wasn't just any ordinary nurse. She didn't respond with anger. She didn't yell or cry. Instead, she did something so unexpected, so powerful, it left the entire room speechless. And in that moment, one man learned a lesson he'd never forget. But what exactly did she say? What made a crowd of strangers go silent and stare? You're about to find out, but only if you stay with me till the end, because her response, it wasn't just about her. It was about all of us. If you've ever worked in customer service, healthcare, or any job where people treat you like a robot instead of a human being, then you already know how this feels. That sense of being looked through, of someone assuming you exist only to make their life easier, with no thought to what you're dealing with behind the scenes. Maybe you're a nurse, a teacher, a delivery driver, or maybe you're just someone who believes people deserve respect no matter their job title. If so, then what happens in this story is going to hit you deep. Because behind this viral moment, the moment a nurse quietly flipped the script on entitlement, is a story about strength, patience, and the silent power of dignity. And trust me, once you hear what she says, you'll never forget it. Now, let's be real for a second. You didn't click this video by accident. You're here because that title spoke to something inside you. Maybe it triggered curiosity, maybe it stirred frustration, or maybe it reminded you of someone who's talked down to others like that. You want to know what happens next, and more importantly, how this nurse managed to completely flip the situation. But before we get to that unforgettable moment, before we reach the twist that left a room full of people breathless, you need to understand the full picture. Because the truth is, this moment wasn't just a reaction. It was the result of something building for a long time. And once you see the full story, you'll realize why her response was so much bigger than just a clapback. It was a stand for every exhausted worker, every underpaid caregiver, every quiet hero who gets told to just do their job while saving someone else's world. So, if you're watching this while you're on break at work, or while you're cooking dinner, or sitting in traffic, I'm going to ask you something unusual. Stay with me. Don't click away. Don't scroll to the comments just yet. Because if you've ever been underestimated, unappreciated, or disrespected in public and wished you had the perfect words at the perfect time, this story is for you. And this nurse? She spoke for all of us who've ever bitten our tongue because we couldn't risk losing a job or starting a scene. But this time, something changed. She didn't shout. She didn't lose control. She didn't play their game. She redefined it, and she did it in a way that turned the entire hospital waiting room into a stage, with everyone watching. Now let's talk about this man, early 50s, businessman type, phone glued to his ear, wearing a crisp button-down like armor. From the moment he walked in, you could feel it, the entitlement. The constant glancing at his watch, the sighs whenever someone passed by, the unspoken demand that his time mattered more than anyone else's. The nurse he snapped at? Her name was Carla. She had bags under her eyes and a name tag slightly fraying at the corners. She'd been working 12-hour shifts all week. She was the kind of nurse who held patients' hands when no family showed up, who stayed late to comfort people in pain, who carried not just medications and charts, but heartbreaks and untold stories. And when he barked those words at her, just your job, he had no idea who he was talking to. Because Carla? She'd seen more humanity in one ER shift than he probably had in a year. And now, she was about to deliver a response that would stick with everyone who heard it. There's a reason this story is going viral. There's a reason people are searching for terms like nurse shuts down rude patient, hospital confrontation caught on camera, epic comeback, and customer gets owned. Because we're in a time where kindness often feels optional, where tempers flare easily, and where the people holding everything together, nurses, teachers, service workers are expected to do so silently. But this story flips that narrative. It reminds us what quiet strength looks like. And the reason you're here, the reason you clicked, is because deep down you want to see that kind of justice. Not loud, not violent, but poetic, powerful, and real. And I know some of you are thinking, maybe she finally lost it. Maybe she yelled back or embarrassed him in public. But no, it wasn't like that. Her response wasn't about ego. It was about reminding someone of their humanity without ever raising her voice. And here's what makes it even more impactful. It wasn't just what she said, it was what happened after. The shift in the room. The way the receptionist stopped typing. The way other patients looked up, phones down, suddenly realizing they were witnessing something they'd never forget. Even the security guard, who usually kept to himself, leaned slightly forward, just watching. But before we go there, before I reveal Carla's words and how she took total control of that moment, I want to ask you one thing. How would you have responded if you were in her shoes? If you were exhausted, overworked, and trying to help someone, only to be snapped at like a servant, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, fought back, or tried to rise above it? That's why her response matters, because in just a few sentences, she changed the entire dynamic. She reminded everyone in that room, and now everyone watching this video, that respect isn't optional. That dignity can't be demanded, it must be given. And here's where it gets even deeper. Because what Carla says, it didn't just change that man's behavior. It revealed why he acted the way he did. It uncovered something beneath the surface that no one saw coming. And I promise you, when you find out what she says and what happens right after, you'll understand why people say this is one of the most unforgettable encounters they've ever seen. So buckle in, because we're just getting started. What happens next? Let's just say it's not what anyone expected. Carla hadn't planned to be at work that day. In fact, she'd filed a vacation request 3 weeks earlier, hoping to finally spend a few days with her son, Ethan, who just turned 9. They'd been planning a quiet weekend, just the two of them, filled with movie nights, takeout pizza, and maybe a trip to the science museum. Ethan had even drawn a crayon calendar with a big red circle around Friday, labeling it Mom and Me Day. But as it often goes in healthcare, life didn't care about personal plans. When her colleague called in sick and the hospital found itself short-staffed, Carla was the first name on the list. They didn't beg, exactly, but they didn't have to. She knew her floor was already stretched too thin, and Carla, as always, said yes. That decision, putting others first once again, brought her into the orbit of the man who would change everything. He walked in just after 9 a.m., wearing a dark gray blazer and an attitude that entered before he did. His name, as she'd later see on his intake paperwork, was Jeffrey Rollins. Nothing about him screamed danger. In fact, he was the kind of man who blended in effortlessly at business lunches and airport lounges. Middle-aged, salt and pepper hair, expensive watch, Bluetooth earpiece that he didn't bother removing even when speaking to hospital staff. He claimed he had an urgent matter, something about a follow-up scan that should have been ready by now. He waved his insurance card around like it was a backstage pass, expected every answer instantly, and grew increasingly irritated with every passing minute. At first, Carla thought he was just another high-strung patient, the kind she'd seen 100 times. But there was something else about him, something colder, more calculating, like this wasn't just a frustrating delay for him, it was personal. She didn't know it yet, but Jeffrey had been in that hospital before, just a few weeks ago. And back then, something had gone wrong. Something he wasn't willing to let go. To everyone else, Carla looked composed. She moved between patients with practiced grace, managing charts, medication orders, and comfort requests with the kind of calm only veteran nurses carry. But inside, she was frayed. It wasn't just the missed weekend with her son. It wasn't just the endless overtime, the missed lunches, or the aching feet. It was something deeper, a growing sense that no matter how hard she worked, she was invisible. The patients who never learned her name. The supervisors who praised her dedication but never backed her up when things got tense. The world that had spent the last 2 years clapping for nurses, but now went back to ignoring them. That feeling had been building for weeks, maybe longer. So when Jeffrey raised his voice and tossed that phrase at her like a weapon, asterisk, just your job, asterisk, it wasn't just about that moment. It was a spark to a fire that had long been waiting. What Carla didn't realize was that others were watching. The receptionist, Melissa, had already texted someone at the front desk. Guy in the blazer's back. You know him. A security guard stationed near the entrance glanced over, subtly adjusting his posture. Even the nurse in pediatrics, overhearing bits of the confrontation through the hallway intercom, leaned back in her chair, recognizing the tone, the kind that always escalates. But nobody intervened. Not yet. There was an unspoken rule in places like this. You let things play out, unless someone's safety is at stake. And besides, Carla could handle herself, couldn't she? What the other staff didn't know was that Jeffrey wasn't just frustrated about a delayed scan. He had an agenda. A few weeks earlier, he'd come to the ER in the middle of the night, complaining of dizziness and blurred vision. He was admitted for observation, and during that stay, something happened. A file was misplaced. A signature went unsigned. No one caught it at the time, but for Jeffrey, it was a critical mistake, one that affected a legal case he was building. He believed someone had cost him a lot of money, and he believed that person was a nurse. He didn't remember names, but he remembered faces. Carla's in particular. And whether or not she'd actually made the error didn't seem to matter to him anymore. He decided she had, and now he was back, angry, entitled, and quietly determined to make her pay. But Carla, still unaware of any of this, was trying to finish updating a patient chart when he snapped. She asked him politely to wait, said she'd be right with him, but Jeffrey wasn't interested in waiting. That's when the words came. "I don't know what your problem is," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "But you're not here to talk. You're not here to socialize. You're here to do your job. So how about you skip the attitude and do what you're paid for?" For a few seconds, the entire waiting room froze. The TV above the check-in desk kept playing some daytime talk show, but no one was listening. All eyes turned to Carla, and you could almost feel the breath holding across the room. No one knew what she would do. Most people expected her to apologize, to keep the peace, to swallow the insult and move on. That's what you do in customer-facing jobs, right? Take it on the chin and smile through it. But not today. Here's where the story begins to twist. Because Carla didn't respond right away. She just looked at him for a moment. Not with anger. Not even with sadness. Just studied him. Like she'd seen 1,000 versions of him before and wasn't surprised by a single thing. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't with rage. It was with something far more unnerving, clarity. That was the moment everything started to shift. But before we get to her words, you need to understand something else. Something about Carla's past that even her coworkers didn't fully know. A few years earlier, Carla had been on the other side of that hospital bed. Her husband, Daniel, a firefighter, had been injured on duty, trapped in a structure collapse that crushed half his body. She'd sat in those same plastic chairs, waited on those same delayed updates, and watched as overworked nurses tried to keep up with the chaos. She never raised her voice. She never blamed them, because she knew they were doing their best with what little they had. After Daniel passed, she came back to work just 2 weeks later. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. Because she knew firsthand what compassion in a hospital truly meant. That history lived in her every day, and it's what gave her the kind of strength that doesn't shout, but radiates. And yet, something about Jeffrey's arrival felt off. He was too persistent, too focused on Carla specifically. One of the orderlies later mentioned they'd seen him circling the parking lot earlier that morning. Another nurse said she recognized him from an online review site where he'd posted a scathing 1-star review with language that hinted at legal threats. No one could prove he came back with a plan, but the signs were there. He wanted something, whether it was revenge, recognition, or just someone to blame. Only he knew for sure. But Carla? She was starting to piece it together. The way he looked at her like he already knew her. The way he tried to provoke her, not once, but several times over the last hour. This wasn't about a scan. This was personal. And Carla had a choice to make. The waiting room buzzed with low murmurs. People shifted in their seats, whispering, pretending not to stare but completely transfixed. Carla adjusted her badge. She stepped closer, not in anger, but with calm certainty. And what she said next wasn't just a response. It was a masterstroke. But just before the words left her mouth, a young woman near the door stood up suddenly. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Wait a second," she said, pointing at Jeffrey. "I know him. I've seen him before, but not here." And that's when everything started to unravel. Carla turned slowly toward the young woman standing near the automatic doors, her fingers still aimed at Jeffrey like she was piecing together a puzzle she didn't even know she had started. "He's not who he says he is," the woman muttered, almost to herself. "I saw him in that news segment, the one about the fraud case at Graybridge Diagnostics." Carla's heart skipped. That name, Graybridge, meant something to her. Years ago, she'd done a temporary rotation there during a staff shortage. It was a high-end private facility known for its VIP clientele, but it also had a darker reputation whispered about behind closed break rooms and staff lounges. Rumors of falsified test results, patient exploitation, and quiet settlements had been floating around for years, but nothing had ever been proven. Still, hearing that name again stirred something unsettling inside her. Why would this man, posing as a patient, have any connection to a place like that? Before Carla could ask the woman for more, a cold, mechanical voice buzzed over the intercom, calling her to room 9 for a medication consult. She made eye contact with Melissa at the front desk, who nodded solemnly as if to say, "This isn't over." But by the time Carla returned 10 minutes later, both Jeffrey and the woman were gone. Just like that. No checkout signature, no paperwork trail, no visible exit captured on the lobby's security camera feed when she checked later with the head of hospital security. It was as if they had both vanished into thin air. Melissa swore she never saw them leave. Even stranger, the surveillance file from that hour glitched midway through the recording. A solid 7 minutes were missing, corrupted, the tech team claimed. Carla had worked in this hospital for over a decade. Never once had she seen the system fail like that. The coincidence was too sharp, too surgical to ignore. Still reeling from that disappearance, Carla did what she always did when her instincts were screaming. She went digging. She pulled the intake log for that day. No record of a Jeffrey Rollins. No ID scan, no insurance card, nothing. It was as if he'd walked in from nowhere. But someone had manually entered his name into the patient list. A name typed, not scanned. She traced the login credentials. It was under a nurse's badge number, one that hadn't been active for 2 years. The badge belonged to a former employee named Elena Crawford, a nurse who had left under mysterious circumstances after an internal audit revealed discrepancies in narcotics logs. No one ever confirmed what really happened to her. She simply resigned, and the administration quietly moved on. Carla remembered Elena, smart, intense, and paranoid. She used to talk about backdoor deals and shadow documentation, always afraid someone was listening. Most people brushed it off. Carla, now, wasn't so sure. That night, Carla couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jeffrey's face, the smug grin, the calculated impatience, the way he had stared at her like he was daring her to remember something. She pulled out an old cardboard box from her closet, filled with papers she'd saved from her early years in nursing, evaluations, transfer letters, a few hospital memos she'd kept for no good reason. Near the bottom, folded and yellowed with time, was a copy of an old floor schedule from Graybridge Diagnostics. She scanned the names and froze. One stood out, J. Rollins, compliance auditor. He wasn't a patient. He had been an inspector, a man tasked with reviewing their internal operations. His presence back then wasn't to seek care, but to oversee a crisis. And Carla remembered now. He questioned her directly during one of her final shifts at Graybridge. He'd asked her about patient logs and test authorizations she'd never seen before. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now it was clear. He had remembered her. And he had come back with unfinished business. The next morning, Carla went straight to the hospital director. She laid out everything. The surveillance glitch, the missing patient record, the login from a long deactivated badge, and her own memory of Jeffrey's time at Greybridge. The director listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "Carla," he said, "I appreciate your concern, but I need you to leave this alone. We're not reopening a chapter that was legally closed years ago. If something happened at Greybridge, it's not our jurisdiction, and digging into it now could put your license at risk." The words landed like ice water. Carla had come looking for support. Instead, she got a warning. The message was clear: stop asking questions. And that's when she knew this went deeper than she thought. Later that day, Carla found a sticky note tucked under her keyboard at the nurse's station. No signature, just a scribbled message in slanted handwriting: "You're not safe here. Trust no one." For a long time, she just stared at it, wondering who had written it and how they knew what she was trying to uncover. Was it someone on her side? Or someone trying to scare her off? Her world was unraveling, piece by piece. And the more she tried to understand, the more elusive the truth became. Then, just as she was about to log off her workstation, her screen flickered. An old patient file opened on its own, a chart from years ago, during her time at Greybridge. The name on it was familiar. Not Jeffrey's, but someone connected to him. A woman listed as his emergency contact. A woman who had also been one of Carla's patients, someone she'd assumed had died under routine circumstances. But this file said otherwise. According to the notes, she had been transferred out of Greybridge late one night. No discharge summary. No forwarding hospital. No explanation. Just gone. And suddenly, Carla wasn't just chasing shadows. She was standing at the edge of something massive. A cover-up. A lie that had been buried so deeply, only someone like Jeffrey would dare to dig it back up. But the question was, why now? And more importantly, what did he want from her? The answer, it turned out, was already closer than she realized. Because while Carla was unraveling the past, someone else had been watching her every move. 2 counties away, in a quiet residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Boulder, Colorado, an old friend of Carla's, Luis Ramirez, was about to sit down for dinner with his wife when he noticed something strange on his porch. At first, he thought it was a flyer, just another takeout menu or local political handout. But when he picked it up, he realized it was a single photograph. No envelope. No message. Just a faded picture of a hospital hallway taken from an awkward angle, like it had been snapped from a security monitor. In the corner of the frame stood a nurse with her back turned, Carla. Luis stared at the image for a long moment, confused and unsettled. He and Carla hadn't spoken in over a year, not since he left his position as the hospital's IT security advisor under tense and unspoken circumstances. But this photo, this quiet, deliberate delivery, felt like a whisper from the past, one tied directly to whatever Carla had now found herself tangled in. On the back of the photo, scrawled in smudged ink, were 6 words: "She's not the only one watching." Luis didn't say a word to his wife. He tucked the photo into the inside pocket of his jacket, his appetite gone. That night, instead of sleeping, he sat in his garage, poring over a locked drive he had taken with him the day he resigned. It was encrypted and hidden for good reason. Back then, Luis had stumbled across a data tunnel embedded deep in the hospital server, an unauthorized access point rerouting sensitive files to an off-site server with no hospital affiliation. He flagged it, reported it, and within days, he was pressured to resign. No cause. No scandal. Just veiled threats and soft, legal language. He took the backup as leverage, but he never opened it. Until now. The moment he cracked the first folder, his breath caught. Patient files. Hundreds of them. Some were flagged as unrecorded transfers, many with missing dates, incomplete signatures, and treatment notes signed by doctors who no longer worked there, or, in a few cases, had passed away. He recognized names. One in particular hit like a punch to the ribs: Annette Rollins. The emergency contact Carla had mentioned on the phone when she called him earlier that week. Back then, it didn't ring a bell. Now it did. Luis remembered the night that file came through the system, a routine update that flagged anomalies. He had tried to pull the records for a cross-check, but they vanished before he could finish. Now here they were, sitting in this hidden cache. But even more chilling was the last entry on her file: patient reassigned. Authorization: EC-17. He didn't know what EC-17 meant, but it wasn't part of any hospital code he'd ever seen. As Luis continued scrolling, he noticed more files marked with the same cryptic designation. Some patients were flagged for reassignment, others for containment, and a few simply read expunged. These weren't just medical notes. They read like orders. Luis picked up his phone, hands trembling, and called Carla. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. He hesitated, then left a message. Carla, it's Luis. I don't know what you've gotten into, but whatever it is, it's not just about Greybridge. It's bigger. I need to show you something. Call me, please. He hung up, wiped sweat from his brow, and double-checked the locks on his doors. Back at the hospital, Carla's shift dragged on into the early morning. She tried to act normal, to focus on patients and routines, but her mind was in constant motion. Every monitor beep felt louder, every corridor more claustrophobic. Melissa approached her during a quiet moment near the supply room. You got another note, she whispered. Carla glanced down. A folded paper was tucked into the side of the medication cart. She opened it slowly. It was a photocopy of the same patient record she had found earlier, the one tied to Annette Rollins, but this version had something added: a signature. Elena Crawford, the nurse who had vanished after leaving Greybridge. Her name was stamped at the bottom, next to the words, Final Handler. That night, Carla finally pieced it together. Annette had never been discharged. She had been processed. And Elena was part of whatever that process entailed. But if Elena was truly involved, where had she gone? Dead? In hiding? Or worse, still working under a different identity? The question chilled Carla to the bone, but there was no time to dwell. Her phone buzzed. A new text from an unknown number. Stop looking. Next time, it won't be a warning. Luis, meanwhile, was already planning his drive to meet her in person. But as he walked to his car the next morning, he noticed something unsettling. The photo of Carla that had been left at his door was now gone from his jacket pocket. He was sure he hadn't dropped it. He tore apart his garage, then checked the home security feed. The footage skipped from 2:16 a.m. to 2:24 a.m., the same glitch Carla had seen on her hospital footage. The screen jumped and then resumed, as if nothing had happened. But someone had been there. They were watching both of them, tracking every step, controlling what they saw and didn't see. And now, a new player had entered the game. A man neither Carla nor Luis knew yet. But this stranger was about to upend everything. Because while they were digging into the past, he was focused on the future. And he had no intention of letting them get there. The morning air was unusually thick, as if the very sky over Greybridge had taken on the weight of what was brewing beneath it. Carla awoke before her alarm, her heart racing, her skin damp with sweat. It wasn't a nightmare that stirred her. It was silence. A complete, unnatural quiet. The kind that prickled the back of your neck and made you second-guess reality. She sat up slowly, her instincts immediately kicking in. Something wasn't right. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, but froze. It wasn't there. She always left it in the same spot, but the table was bare. Panic trickled in. She scanned the room. Everything looked normal until it didn't. Her bedroom door, which she remembered closing the night before, was cracked open just slightly. Not enough to suggest a breeze or a careless moment, but enough to say someone had been here. She moved slowly, her breath shallow, stepping into the hallway with caution she'd never needed in her own home. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She searched the living room, the kitchen, then the back door. Locked. But the deadbolt was turned the wrong way. She never locked it like that. And then she saw it. Her phone, lying face down on the couch. A small red sticker had been placed on the back. That same red, the same shade as the ink on the first note she had received at the hospital. She grabbed it, her fingers trembling, and turned it on. There were no new texts, no notifications. Nothing unusual until she noticed the wallpaper had been changed. Her usual background, A photo of her and her sister on a beach trip had been replaced with a black screen. One line glowed across the middle in stark white font. "Don't make us come back." She stumbled backward, heart racing, the weight of the message sinking in. This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a declaration. They had been inside her house. They had touched her phone, watched her sleep, moved through her space like ghosts. And they wanted her to know. There was no ambiguity left. She was being hunted. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was a fact. She called Luis immediately. No answer. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Nothing. Then Melissa. No response either. Carla felt the walls closing in. She could almost hear her blood rushing in her ears as she threw on jeans and a hoodie and headed out the door, locking it behind her out of sheer habit even though she knew it meant nothing now. She drove straight to Luis's house, her tires screaming around turns. When she got there, the driveway was empty. The front door, wide open. Her stomach dropped. She approached carefully, calling his name. No response. The house was a wreck, papers scattered, drawers pulled open, monitors smashed, like someone had gone looking for something and didn't care how loud they were. In the middle of the living room floor, a single photograph was laid out carefully, face up. It was of Luis, asleep in his garage chair. Across the bottom, written in red ink, were the words, "You're too late." Carla fell to her knees. For the first time since this all began, tears spilled down her face. The fear wasn't abstract anymore. It was real, physical, raw. Luis was gone. Maybe taken. Maybe worse. And she had no idea who did it or why. But she knew one thing with painful clarity. He had uncovered something he wasn't supposed to. Something that now made her a liability too. Driving away from the scene, she began to notice things, patterns she had ignored before because they felt like coincidence. The same black SUV showing up in her hospital parking lot, her grocery store, parked outside her street on 3 different nights. The same oddly dressed woman she saw browsing magazines at the hospital gift shop, who never seemed to buy anything. Faces she'd written off as part of the background now loomed larger, more ominous. Every movement outside her window felt choreographed. Every stranger's glance lingered just a second too long. She tried going to the police that afternoon, but something was off there too. The officer on duty listened half-heartedly, took no notes, didn't even ask for her full name. When she pressed for a report to be filed, he smiled faintly and said, "Are you sure you want to go down that road?" That was all it took. She walked out without another word, her mouth dry, her chest tight. Even law enforcement couldn't be trusted. If they weren't directly involved, they were either too afraid or too compromised to act. That night, Carla checked into a motel under a fake name. It was dingy and cold, but anonymous. She sat on the bed with the lights off, watching the shadows under the door, listening to the wind rattle the window. The silence was louder than ever now, not just outside but within her. Her thoughts spiraled. What was it about Graybridge? What was so important, so secret, that people were disappearing or dying to protect it? And why was she being drawn deeper into it with every step? She couldn't tell if she was meant to solve this or simply be destroyed by it. She didn't know who to trust, who might be listening, or if she even had any allies left. But she did know one thing. Whatever Luis found in those files, it wasn't just about medical records. It was about something systemic. Something that didn't want the light. And she had just become the only one left willing to shine it. But just as she tried to plan her next move, her motel TV flickered on without warning. The screen buzzed, then flashed a single image, a photo of her sister, smiling, holding a coffee in the hospital cafeteria. Carla hadn't seen that photo before. She hadn't even taken it. A distorted voice crackled through the TV speakers, low and mechanical, barely more than a whisper. "Time's up, nurse." Carla sat frozen, the eerie glow of the motel television reflecting off her wide eyes as the distorted voice echoed in her ears. "Time's up, nurse." Her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. The photo of her sister wasn't just unnerving, it was impossible. That picture was recent. The clothes, the hairstyle, even the hospital backdrop, it was from the past week. But her sister had been missing for months. Everyone had assumed she'd left town after a breakdown following their parents' death. Carla had never stopped searching, but there was never any sign, until now. And whoever had sent that image hadn't just been watching Carla. They'd been close enough to photograph someone who wasn't supposed to be here. It shattered everything. Her sister hadn't run. She hadn't disappeared. Someone had taken her. And all this time, she'd been nearby. The motel room seemed to shrink around her as the full weight of it hit. Carla replayed every step of the past few weeks. Every clue, every warning, every red, and it all led back to one place. The hospital. But not just any wing. The restricted section. The one she hadn't been allowed in since the administrative restructuring. A section controlled not by the medical board, but by private contractors. A name flickered into her memory, Valen Systems. It had been stamped on some old delivery crates months ago, then vanished. Supposedly a biomedical storage vendor. But now it reeked of something more sinister. Desperate, Carla pulled out her laptop and searched the hospital records. Only this time, she didn't search for her sister's name. She searched the visitor logs. And that's when she saw it. Her heart slammed against her chest. Her sister's name was there. Signed in under a different ID. Multiple times. The last login was just 10 days ago. She'd been in the hospital. And she hadn't been a patient. The notes tagged her as a consultant. That made no sense. Her sister was a graphic designer. She had nothing to do with medicine. But then came the twist that flipped Carla's entire world upside down. Next to the signature was the name of the approving physician. Dr. Philip Gardner. The same doctor who had mentored Carla. The same man who had vouched for her during her hiring process. The same man who'd retired just 3 weeks before this chaos began. Carla had trusted him like family. He had spoken at her graduation. He was the one who guided her through the hardest shifts of her residency. And yet there he was, greenlighting restricted access for her supposedly missing sister, under a false identity, in a wing Carla had been warned not to even approach. Everything spiraled at once. The missing records, the red dots, the vanishing coworkers, Luis's disappearance, it all tied back to this hidden network operating under the very place she'd spent her life serving. And now the person she thought had been taken might have been involved in the deception from the start. But why? With trembling fingers, Carla dialed a number she hadn't used in years, Dr. Gardner's personal landline. It rang twice before someone picked up, but it wasn't him. A woman's voice answered, too calm, too cold. You shouldn't be calling this number, she said plainly. They'll trace it. Carla ignored the warning. Where is my sister? She demanded. There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice said, You still think she's the victim in this? The line went dead. Carla stared at the phone, her mind split open with disbelief. She had spent months mourning, chasing, searching for someone she believed was a casualty. But what if her sister wasn't a pawn at all? What if she had been working with them? What if this entire thing, the messages, the fear, the surveillance, wasn't a hunt, but a test? A trap? A psychological game engineered to isolate Carla from everyone she trusted until she cracked under the pressure? Suddenly, the red dots didn't feel like warnings. They felt like breadcrumbs. And Carla was beginning to realize she hadn't just been targeted, she had been chosen. And the most terrifying part? She didn't know whether it was to save something or to destroy it. The air outside the hospital felt heavier than usual, as if it carried the burden of everything Carla was about to do. She stood in the parking lot just after midnight, staring at the looming glass windows above, her heart pounding in her ears. She knew that going back meant crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But every step she'd taken, every lie uncovered, every late-night call and flickering red had led to this moment. She clutched the old ID badge she had borrowed, no, stolen from her former supervisor's locker. It wasn't just access, it was betrayal. But what choice did she have? The truth wasn't going to reveal itself from the safety of her apartment. She had to go back in, deep into the restricted section of the hospital, and confront the reality no one else wanted to see. But before she even reached the door, her phone buzzed in her pocket. One message. A name she hadn't seen in weeks. Luis. Her heart leapt, but when she opened the message, it wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a rescue message or an explanation. It was a video. Grainy, low resolution, clearly recorded in secret. The footage showed a hallway, one she recognized instantly. The restricted sub-basement, near the cryo-storage lab. But what chilled her to the bone wasn't the location. It was the people. Two figures stood under the flickering lights. One was Dr. Gardner. The other, her sister. They were arguing, but no sound accompanied the video. Her sister pointed a finger at Gardner, then held up a black case. He reached for it and she pulled back. The frame jittered, then cut to black. No context. No timestamp. No idea who had filmed it or when. Just enough to rip open the last remaining doubt in Carla's mind. She couldn't go in blindly anymore. Someone had to know. She drove across town, barely stopping for lights, until she pulled into a dimly lit driveway. The porch light flicked on, and the front door creaked open. Officer Jameson stepped out with a look of disbelief. "Carla? It's almost 1 a.m.
She didn't waste time.
You said if I had anything real, you'd listen. This is it." She showed him the video. His face drained of color. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I can't say. You just have to trust me." But Jameson didn't answer. Instead, he walked inside, motioning for her to follow. She hesitated. "What are you doing?" He looked at her, his voice lower now, controlled. "Because if what you're showing me is real, then you're already in more danger than you realize. And if I help you, that makes me a target too." Inside, he poured a drink but didn't touch it. "You're saying Gardner's not retired?" She nodded. "And your sister, she's alive. Working with him, maybe against him. I don't know." Jameson sighed, rubbing his face. "Carla, I've heard whispers.
About that wing.
About disappearances. But if I report this through normal channels, you won't hear from me again. I'll be benched or worse." He paused, then looked her dead in the eye. "So here's your choice. Walk away now, stay safe, let it all get buried. Or we go in together. No badge. No backup. Just the two of us. But if we're caught, there's no help coming. Not from the force, not from the hospital, not from anyone." It was an impossible decision. Her entire life had been built on trust. Trust in the system, trust in medicine, trust in the people who raised her, guided her, protected her. But that trust had been manipulated, twisted, weaponized. If she walked away now, she could still pick up the pieces. Live a life outside the shadows. But it would never be whole. Not without the truth. Not knowing what really happened to her sister. Or to Luis. Or to herself. She took a breath, slow and steady. "I'm not walking away," she said. "Not this time." Jameson nodded grimly, then pulled open a drawer and removed a flash drive. "Then you need to see this too. I've been saving it, but now it's time." He inserted it into his laptop and Carla leaned in. What played on the screen wasn't surveillance footage. It was a document, a classified report stamped with the Valen Systems insignia. And at the top, her sister's name. But what stunned her wasn't the content. It was the author listed at the bottom. Carla Mendez. Her own name. She hadn't written this. She didn't even know it existed. But it was detailed, technical, and filled with phrases only a medical insider would understand. It claimed she'd approved protocols for something called behavioral interruption therapy targeting non-compliant patients. It even listed the hospital's restricted wing as the site of Phase 3 operations. Jameson stared at her. Care to explain? But Carla couldn't. She didn't have an answer. Because the only thing more terrifying than what she had just read was the creeping possibility that someone had been using her identity from the very beginning. The hospital at night looked nothing like the place Carla once knew. Gone were the polished professionalism and smiling faces. In their place was a cold, industrial silence that screamed secrets in every flickering bulb and echoing footstep. As she and Jameson slipped through a back entrance, one he'd long ago memorized during late-night patrols, they felt the weight of every camera, every sensor, every locked door not just as security measures, but as warnings. Something about the quietness made it feel like the hospital itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if they'd dare to go all the way this time. They moved carefully through service corridors lined with old medical equipment and rusting file cabinets. It was here, in this forgotten basement artery of the hospital, that they began to realize the conspiracy wasn't just deeper, it was sprawling. This wasn't about one patient or one wing or even one research team. This was institutional. And the worst part? Carla had unknowingly helped build it. They reached the restricted sublevel, where her stolen ID badge still, shockingly, worked. The door buzzed open, revealing a hallway she barely recognized anymore. Gone were the patient charts and supply carts. In their place were steel doors with no handles, panels that required biometric clearance, and the hum of generators far too powerful for routine hospital equipment. Jameson whispered, "This place doesn't feel like medicine. It feels like containment." She nodded, trying not to let her rising panic show. The file with her name on it still burned in her mind. If she hadn't written it, who had? And for what purpose? They passed one door and paused as voices echoed faintly behind it. Not patients, doctors. Confident. Cold. Discussing data, patient retention metrics, and a name that froze her in place. Mendez. Her sister. Her. Anne Louise. Jameson motioned toward a darkened observation room with a one-way mirror. They slipped inside and watched through the glass as Dr. Gardner stood over a lit table, surrounded by digital schematics and unfamiliar vials marked only with numbers. But he wasn't alone. A woman entered. Carla's breath caught. It was Nurse Eloise, the one who'd trained her, mentored her, consoled her after long shifts. The nurse who, just weeks ago, told her to let it go. Carla's world tilted as she saw Eloise lean over the table and whisper something into Gardner's ear before removing her scrubs, revealing a security badge marked Tier 5, Executive Research Access. "I trusted her," Carla whispered, as her voice cracked with disbelief. "She used to buy me coffee." Jameson stared grimly at the scene. "You're not the only one they fooled." Then something else caught their attention. A large display screen on the back wall lit up with a rotating slideshow, faces, profiles, digital readouts. One by one they flashed, Louise, Carla, her sister, and dozens of others she didn't recognize. The last name made Jameson curse under his breath. "That's my nephew." The file labeled him a non-responsive subject in pilot cohort. Neither of them spoke for a moment, both realizing the same thing. This wasn't just surveillance. It was selection, an ongoing operation that went far beyond what either of them had imagined. Suddenly, the monitor blinked off. Then a voice came through the intercom, not from the room they were watching, but their own. "It's over, Carla. We know you're here." Her blood went cold. "They've been watching us since the elevator," Jameson muttered, drawing his weapon. "We need to move.
Now."
But before they could turn, the door behind them slammed shut. A red light bathed the room. "Lockdown." "No signal," Jameson said, checking his phone. Carla rushed to the one-way mirror, banging on it, screaming. But the people in the room didn't react. In fact, they were gone, as if they had never been there. The table, the files, everything had vanished from the room beyond. What they had seen just moments ago was no longer there. The display had been pre-recorded. A trap. Her heart pounded as the walls seemed to close in. "We're not investigating them," she said aloud. "They're testing us." From the ceiling, a soft hiss. A chemical agent, clear and scentless, but the sting in her eyes came fast. Jameson ripped open an air vent with his baton, and they crawled inside with barely a second to spare. As they gasped for breath, Carla's mind raced. The betrayal of Eloise. The files in her name. The faces on the screen. This wasn't a rogue experiment. It was a systemic operation, deeply embedded, protected at the highest levels. And they weren't just targets, they were part of the data. Subjects in a behavioral study masked as a medical breakthrough. But the question that haunted her most wasn't how they got her into this. It was why. The emergency stairwell was damp and echoing with each panic step as Carla and Jameson climbed higher, lungs burning, the dim red glow of backup lights flashing like a warning beacon behind their eyes. Somewhere below, alarms were sounding, doors were sealing, and voices crackled through unseen speakers, measured, clinical voices asking for retrieval teams and containment protocols. But the top floor, the one floor the public never had access to, was where everything would finally converge. Carla knew it. This was where the experiment was run, not just observed. It was where they would find the real files, the real motives, and the person who had orchestrated it all from behind the sterile curtain of medicine and morality. The door to the executive research level groaned open, revealing a long hallway lined with glass-paneled rooms, each one containing what looked like private patient beds, but no patients. Only data terminals and biometric scanners. And in the center of it all stood Dr. Gardner, alone, calm, as if he had expected them all along. His lab coat was gone. He wore dark clothes now, almost militaristic in cut. "You made it," he said smoothly, voice unhurried despite the chaos below. "I was hoping you would." Carla didn't waste time. She moved forward with the fire of months of deception in her chest. "You used my name. My research. You made it look like I signed off on this. What the hell is this place, Gardner?" He raised his hands, as if still in control, still teaching a class. "You're asking the wrong question. The question isn't what this place is, it's why it exists." He stepped aside, revealing a wall-length screen flickering to life. Footage played, clips from hospital rooms across the country. Patients exhibiting the same symptoms. Sudden memory loss. High intelligence collapse. Altered behavior patterns. Gardner tapped a button and brought up Carla's file, alongside dozens more. "You weren't just chosen for your mind, Carla. You were chosen for your resilience. We needed someone who wouldn't break. Someone we could test from the inside, someone who could help scale the results without realizing it." Her stomach dropped. Test for what? He turned to face her fully, eyes gleaming with twisted satisfaction. Behavioral adaptation. Emotional suppression. We were preparing for post-conflict medical emergencies. Predictive medicine. How far society can bend before it fractures. The patients weren't sick. They were responses. And you were the stimulus. Jameson stepped between them, weapon drawn. "So all this was a game to you?" Gardner didn't flinch. "Not a game. A simulation. And it's still running." But it wasn't until Carla noticed the glass panels behind Gardner lighting up with new silhouettes, people behind the mirrored glass, that the real twist hit. Her sister, unconscious. A child who looked like Jameson's nephew. Other faces she'd seen on the data logs. They weren't patients, they were batteries in the system. Alive, unconscious, connected. "What did you do to them?" Carla whispered, the horror rising in her throat. Gardner smiled, not cruelly, but with a clinical detachment. "They volunteered. Mostly. Some were deemed critical to outcome success. Emotional anchors for key personnel. Collateral." The word hit her like a slap. That's what her sister had become. A tool to control her. She lunged, and Jameson tried to stop her, but she was already too far gone. She needed to end this. Gardner sidestepped easily, tapping something on his watch, and suddenly the room sealed itself. Lights flickered. The display began deleting files, one by one. "You've seen too much. The program can't risk exposure." But Jameson, who'd been quiet, stepped toward a nearby control panel. "Carla, the power node, back corner." She turned, ripped the panel off with shaking hands, and stared at the exposed circuitry. "You shut this down," Gardner warned, "and every subject in cryo-suspension flatlines. You'll kill them all." Her hand froze. He was bluffing. He had to be. But the doubt was poison in her mind. "You created this dilemma," she said, eyes locked on his. "And now you want me to carry the weight of it." Before she could decide, another voice came through the intercom.
Soft. Weak.
Familiar. Carla Dewitt. Her sister. Awake. Barely audible, but there. "He's lying, not life support, just control."
That was all she needed.
She ripped the main cable free. Alarm screamed. The screen behind Gardner went black. He rushed forward in a fury, but Jameson tackled him hard. "Go," he shouted. "I'll hold him." She ran for the pod where her sister lay, unlocking it manually, pulling her free just as oxygen hissed back into the room. And then, as backup security burst through the lower floors, the entire system shut down. A system-wide crash Gardner never anticipated, because the heart of the experiment had always been Carla's refusal to stop fighting, even when the data said she would. But just as the dust settled, as emergency responders poured in, as Jameson cuffed Gardner to a radiator and backup servers melted in the heat of the system's overload, Carla saw one last screen flicker to life. Just one. A simple message blinking in pale green. Phase 1 complete. Awaiting instructions for Phase 2. Beneath it, a name. Eloise. Not a nurse. Not anymore. Just the next ghost in a system much deeper than they'd ever imagined. The days that followed weren't marked by headlines or sirens, but by a strange, aching silence, one that blanketed the hospital, the people inside it, and most of all, Carla herself. The truth had come out, yes, but not in the way anyone expected. There were no press conferences, no high-profile arrests or federal crackdowns. What happened behind those mirrored walls was buried under layers of bureaucracy and half-truths that wrapped the story in legal red tape, silencing most of the public fallout. Dr. Gardner was transferred to a secure medical research facility, according to the only public statement issued, code, Carla knew, for a government-controlled lockbox where inconvenient minds were kept from ever speaking again. Jameson filed his final report and then vanished into quiet retirement, his name redacted from nearly every document attached to the investigation. No medals, no thank yous. Just a quiet end to a very loud secret. And Eloise, the nurse who had been at the center of it all, both a guardian and a gatekeeper, was never seen again. Her apartment stood empty. Her credentials wiped from every system, as if she'd never existed in the first place. But the one thing they couldn't erase was the damage done. Carla's sister recovered slowly, both physically and mentally, though fragments of her time inside the cryosystem remained lost to whatever neurological map the experiment had overwritten. Some days she was fully herself. Other days she drifted like a ghost, staring at nothing for hours as if listening to voices no one else could hear. Carla stayed by her side, refusing to leave the hospital until she was strong enough to walk out on her own. In that sterile recovery room, amid beeping monitors and fading bruises, Carla came to understand the deeper truth. This wasn't just about science or secrets. It was about power. The kind that hides behind benevolent causes, that cloaks itself in healing and help while quietly manipulating the hearts and minds of the people it claims to protect. And yet, despite everything, there was something she couldn't let go of. That final message, the one blinking green text on the screen just before the shutdown. Phase 1 complete. Awaiting instructions for Phase 2. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Whatever she'd exposed, it wasn't over. There were others, other facilities, other experiments, possibly even other people like her, caught in webs of trust and deception, never realizing they were pawns in a much larger game. She dug through everything in the weeks after, hospital records, facility blueprints, tech contracts, but every trail hit a wall. And that's when she realized something even more chilling. The system wasn't just digital. It was human. It lived inside people. In loyalties, in fear, in silence. The program had always depended on one thing to thrive: compliance. And now it would have to do without hers. Carla went back to work eventually, but not at the hospital. She became a whistleblower's advisor, quietly guiding others who suspected they were caught in similar traps. She taught them how to look for signs, how to read between lines, how to trust their instincts when the facts didn't add up. No interviews, no press tours, just one person at a time. Slowly, quietly, she built a network, people who believed her, not because she told them what happened, but because they'd lived echoes of it themselves. She never mentioned Gardner again. Never spoke his name aloud. But every time she passed a locked door or a darkened hallway, every time she spotted a nurse with no visible ID badge or a clipboard that didn't quite match its log, her heart raced just a little faster. One night, as she left a downtown cafe after a long meeting with another anonymous informant, She spotted something across the street. A small clinic. New sign. Frosted windows. She almost kept walking but something about the logo caught her eye. It was clean.
Modern. Corporate.
But embedded in the design was a single, sharp line that reminded her of something she'd seen before, something buried deep in the code Gardner once used. A line of encryption. A marker. She paused, staring, her breath visible in the cold night air. And for just a moment, a shadow passed by one of the windows. A tall figure in a nurse's uniform. The silhouette looked back, just for a second. Then it vanished. Carla stood frozen. Not in fear. Not anymore. But in understanding. The story was over for now. But the system lived on. Watching.
Testing.
Waiting. And as she walked away into the night, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. Because the next time someone told a nurse to just do her job, they'd better be prepared for what came next.